24 hours left. That's it. 24 hours between the moment you're hearing this sentence and the instant when the sky somewhere in the world will go dark in the middle of the day. Not a cloud, not a storm. The moon positioning itself exactly in front of the sun, erasing for a few minutes the one thing that never stops. The one thing that's always there, the thing we never imagined could disappear, even for an instant. And maybe you're watching this video without really knowing why you clicked. Maybe the title pulled you in before you understood the reason. That happens with eclipses too. They pull attention before any explanation. And if you've made it this far, it's worth staying until the end. Because what we're about to talk about isn't just astronomy. It's about you, about this specific week of your life, and about something you might already be feeling. Even if you can't quite name it yet, before anything else, one thing needs to be clear. What you're about to hear is not scientific fact, not guaranteed prediction, not a promise that something will happen just because the moon is going to cross in front of the sun. Eclipses are real astronomical phenomena, measurable, predictable with mathematical precision. Science explains that part very well. What we're offering here is another layer. A symbolic layer, an emotional one, almost poetic, that many traditions, many cultures, and many people around the world have used for centuries to think about cycles, about endings, about new beginnings. It's a lens, not an absolute truth. And it's through that lens that we're going to walk together for the next few minutes, because something strange happens every time an eclipse gets close. People start looking inward. Without planning it, without coordinating, as if the body and mind sense that time feels different. Have you ever noticed that? Felt in weeks like this one, a restlessness with no logical explanation. A sudden urge to resolve things that had been shelved for months. A sudden exhaustion with situations you'd been quietly tolerating? If so, maybe you're already, without realizing it, inside the energy of this week. They call this week Eclipse Week. And it's not just a pretty name meant to grab attention. It's a way of describing a period when symbolically cycles seem to speed up. What was slow suddenly demands urgency. What was confusing suddenly demands clarity. What was being avoided suddenly knocks on the door and refuses to be ignored any longer. It's as if life, in this window of days, decides to strip off the varnish and show what's really underneath. And tomorrow, exactly tomorrow, the peak of all this arrives. The moment when the moon positions itself between Earth and the sun, completely covering the solar disk for anyone standing in the right line across the planet. For a few minutes, day turns into night. Birds fall silent, thinking the day passed too quickly. The temperature drops. People stop whatever they're doing and look up, even knowing they shouldn't look directly without protection. There's something in that collective gesture. Millions of people at the same time, in different countries, different languages, different cultures, all doing the exact same thing, raising their eyes toward the same point in the sky. Think about that for a second. How many times in life does all of humanity look literally in the same direction at the same time? Not for a news event, not for a political moment, for the sky. For something no government controls, no company sells, no person can speed up or slow down. Only nature, following its own quiet mathematics, reminding all of us that there are rhythms bigger than our schedules, bigger than our deadlines, bigger than our small everyday urgencies. And that's exactly why so many people feel this week calls for a different kind of attention. It's not about blindly believing the eclipse will solve problems for you. It's about using this moment as a mirror, a symbolic pause to ask, where am I really? What am I carrying that I should have already let go of? What am I waiting to happen on its own, when really only I can move it forward? Let's talk now about the before, about these final 24 hours, because this is where the real preparation happens. The change doesn't begin during the eclipse. It begins before. In the quiet choices you make when no one's watching. In the conversations you decide to have or not have. In the excuses you decide to stop accepting from yourself. Think about a decision you've been putting off. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be small every day, but heavy. That job that no longer represents you. That relationship that turned into a routine of wear and tear instead of exchange. That project you started full of enthusiasm and that got forgotten in some mental drawer. Along with so many other things you told yourself you'd get back to someday. That someday has a curious way of never arriving on its own. It needs to be summoned. And maybe this week, these final hours before the eclipse, are exactly the invitation that was missing. Because there's a huge difference between waiting for a sign and creating a decision. A lot of people spend their lives waiting for signs. Waiting for the universe to send a clear message, an obvious push, a door opening on its own. And signs do appear, often subtle, almost whispered. But the sign, no matter how strong, doesn't replace action. It's only the invitation. Walking through the door is up to you. And it's interesting to think that symbolically, the eclipse represents exactly that kind of situation. The moon doesn't ask permission to pass in front of the sun. It simply occupies the right space at the right moment. And because of that, everything changes appearance for a few minutes. It's not about the moon becoming stronger than the sun. It's about alignment. It's about being in the right position at the right time, allowing something different to happen. And if you stop to think about your own life, you might notice that many of the most important breakthroughs didn't come from you becoming a different person. They came from you, exactly as you already were. Simply putting yourself in the right place at the right time, saying yes when before you only said maybe. Transformation doesn't always require complete reinvention. Sometimes it requires positioning. It requires the courage to occupy the space you'd been avoiding out of fear, out of habit, or simply because you thought it still wasn't the right time. Is now the right time? Let's talk about the exact moment when the moon covers the sun, because that instant carries symbolism that runs through entire cultures. In several ancient traditions, that moment was seen as a portal, a pause in the natural order of things, an invitation to look beyond the obvious. When the sun disappears behind the moon, even temporarily, something strange happens to human perception. What was always there, shining, outshining everything around it with its constant light, suddenly hides. And it's exactly in that temporary blackout that other things become visible. Have you ever noticed that during a total eclipse, it's possible to see stars in the middle of the day? Stars that were there the whole time, of course, but that the sun's strong light simply didn't let show through. The stronger light, in a way, was hiding other truths, smaller ones, but no less important. And when that light goes out for a few moments, what was invisible reveals itself. Isn't that a beautiful metaphor for life? How many times has a situation, a person, a routine shone so brightly in your life that it ended up outshining other important things? Other dreams, other possibilities, other versions of yourself that stayed in the shadows because there was always something more urgent, more obvious, more bright, taking up your mental space. And what if for a moment that strong light went out? What would you be able to see that had been hidden this whole time? Maybe that's one of the most important questions of this week. Not what's going to happen to me, but what am I failing to see because of what's shining too brightly in my life right now? Because the end of a cycle rarely arrives as a catastrophe. Most of the time it arrives as exhaustion. As that familiar weight you've been carrying for so long, you barely remember what it feels like without it. As that internal voice, quiet but constant, saying, "This doesn't make sense for me anymore." And we learn, over the course of life, to silence that voice. Because change takes work, because breaking patterns takes energy, because it's easier to keep going on autopilot than to face the discomfort of admitting something needs to change. But weeks like this one, symbolically, seem to turn up the volume on that kind of inner voice. It's as if the volume increases, even without meaning to. And suddenly, things you were able to ignore become impossible to ignore. Feelings that were muffled rise to the surface. Situations you'd been letting slide start demanding a response. That can be scary. It can feel like everything is collapsing at once. But maybe it isn't collapse. Maybe it's simply clarity arriving all at once, after months or even years of being dammed up. Let's pause here for a moment, because I want to share something I read recently, a comment left by someone who's been watching this kind of content for a while. She wrote that during the last eclipse window, she finally decided to leave a relationship that hadn't made sense for over a year. She said it wasn't the eclipse that caused the ending. She already knew deep down for months that it needed to end. What happened was different. She said the approaching eclipse took away the last excuse she was still using to put off the decision. According to her, she felt like time had gotten shorter, even though she knew rationally there was no real deadline at all. And it was that feeling of symbolic urgency that finally pushed her to have the conversation she'd been avoiding. This kind of story comes up often during weeks like this. Not because the eclipse has some magical power over human decisions, but because it works as a symbolic marker, a before and after that the mind uses to organize itself. Sometimes we need an external reference point to finally take the step that had already been ready inside us for a long time. And there's nothing wrong with using that kind of marker in your favor, as long as you understand the power isn't in the sky, it's in you. The sky is just reminding you that time is passing, with or without your permission, and that's exactly why these final 24 hours before the eclipse deserve a different kind of attention. It's not about panicking, thinking you need to fix your entire life before tomorrow's sunrise. It's about using this time to ask yourself honestly, without filters, without sparing yourself, what do I know deep down needs to change, but that I've been avoiding admitting? That might be an uncomfortable question. Most important questions are, but discomfort isn't a sign you're on the wrong path. Sometimes it's exactly the opposite. It's a sign you're finally touching something real. Think about the patterns that keep repeating in your life. That kind of relationship that always ends the same way, even with different people. That feeling of starting from zero in areas you swore you'd already figured out. That cycle of enthusiasm followed by giving up, project after project, always stopping at the same point. Patterns don't repeat by accident. They repeat because on some level, we haven't yet learned the lesson they're trying to teach. Or because we haven't yet made the decision that would truly break that cycle. And maybe this week is an invitation to look those patterns straight in the eye. Not with guilt, not with harsh self-judgment, but with honest curiosity. Why does this keep happening? What haven't I decided to face yet? Let's talk now about what tends to happen during the eclipse itself, symbolically speaking. Many traditions describe this moment as a fertile void, a space of silence between what is no longer and what hasn't yet begun. It's like that instant between breathing in and breathing out, when the air pauses for a fraction of a second before changing direction. It's not exactly nothing happening. It's a transition happening in silence, almost impossible to notice, but absolutely real. During those minutes of darkness in the middle of the day, many people report a strange sense of time suspending, as if everything slowed down, as if, for an instant, priorities became clearer, simply because the scenery around them changed so abruptly that the mind is forced to pay full attention to the present. You can't check your phone while thinking about something else when the sky darkens in the middle of the afternoon. You can't keep running on autopilot when the birds go silent and the wind shifts. Maybe that's the real gift a total eclipse offers, the forced interruption of autopilot. A physical reminder, visible, undeniable, that life isn't just routine, repeating routine. That there are bigger forces, bigger cycles, and that it's part of the human experience from time to time. To be reminded of that so forcefully, it becomes impossible to ignore. And then, of course, the light comes back. The sun reappears from behind the moon, first as a thin line of light, then stronger and stronger, until the day returns to its normal appearance. But does everything really come back exactly the same? Or is there something subtly different, even if only in the perception of whoever was watching? This is the third important moment in this symbolic journey, the after. Because so many people focus on the before, the anticipation, the preparation, and they also focus on the during, the climax of the event, but they forget that the real test lies in the after. It's easy to feel clarity during an intense moment, charged with collective energy, with millions of people looking at the same sky at the same time. The hard part is sustaining that clarity when routine comes back, when notifications start blinking again, when the same responsibilities as always reappear on your screen. And this is where the real transformation lives. If it comes at all, not in the moment of the eclipse itself, but in the following week, the following month, when you decide day after day to honor what became clear during this symbolic pause. Will the decision you made still hold once the sun goes back to shining normally? Will the boundary you set still stand when the person on the other side pushes back one more time? Will the commitment you made to yourself survive the first hard day, the first tempting excuse to give up again? No one knows the answer right now, not even you probably, and that's okay, not knowing. What matters is the intention you plant now, in these next 24 hours. Because intention is always the first step before any real change happens. Let's go back to the question of collective energy, because it deserves more attention than it usually gets. There's something powerful, almost indescribable in knowing that tomorrow millions of people around the world will pause, even if just for a few minutes, to watch the same phenomenon. People who will never meet each other, who speak different languages, who live completely different realities, united by a single gesture, looking up in the same direction. At the same time, in times when so much seems to divide us, there's something almost comforting about that kind of global synchrony. It's not about agreeing on everything. It's not about thinking alike. It's about sharing, for an instant, the same sense of awe in front of something bigger than any difference separating people day to day. The sky doesn't take sides. The eclipse doesn't ask who you vote for, what you believe, where you're from. It simply happens, visible to whoever is standing in the right position, free, unfiltered, with no algorithm deciding who gets to see it and who doesn't. And maybe there's a quiet invitation in an event like this, a reminder that we're part of something bigger, that our small daily urgencies, as real as they are, exist within a much wider context. That the sun will keep shining, the moon will keep orbiting, and the earth will keep spinning, regardless of our personal anxieties. That doesn't make your problems less important, but maybe it offers a bit of perspective, a breath of air in the middle of everyday weight. Now, coming back to you, to this specific week of your life, I want you to think about one thing. What would change if you treated these next 24 hours as if they truly mattered? Not because the universe demands it of you, but because you choose to give this moment that symbolic weight. What would you do differently today, knowing that tomorrow at this exact time, the sky will darken and in some symbolic way, one door will close while another begins to open? Maybe you'll write something you'd been putting off. A letter, a message, an apology, or even an apology to yourself for taking so long to put yourself first. Maybe you'll make a decision that's been circling in your head for weeks without the courage to say it out loud. Maybe you'll simply sit in silence and ask yourself, with no rush to answer right away, what you truly want for the next months of your life. There's no single formula here. Each person will feel this week differently, because each person is in a different point of their own cycle. For some, this might be a week of clear, almost inevitable endings. For others, it might be more subtle, more of an internal reorganization than any visible external change. And both are valid. There's no right way to move through an eclipse week. There's only your way, authentic, real, aligned with what you're living right now. But if there's one thing that connects nearly every account of this kind of period, it's the feeling that something is asking for a decision. Not one more round of analysis, not one more search, not one more conversation postponing the main issue. Decision, that word that carries so much weight because deep down, deciding always means closing other doors so you can walk through one. And maybe that's exactly why so many people avoid important decisions. Because deciding hurts a little. Closing possibilities, even the ones you knew deep down weren't going to happen anyway, still hurts. There's a quiet grief in every real decision, the grief for the path not taken. And it's natural, human to avoid that kind of pain, but living in permanent indecision has its price too. It's just a quieter price, spread out over time, hard to notice until the years pass and you look back wondering what happened to that dream, that project, that version of yourself you swore you'd become as soon as things settled down. Things rarely settle down on their own. They settle when someone decides to act, even with fear, even without all the answers, even with no guarantee it'll work out. That's perhaps the quietest lesson an eclipse can symbolically offer. The moon doesn't wait for the perfect moment to position itself in front of the sun. It simply follows its course, its orbit, its own rhythm, and at a certain point, mathematically inevitable, it arrives at the exact position. It's not luck, it's not chance. It's constant, sustained movement that eventually results in alignment. And what if your life worked that way? What if, instead of waiting for the perfect moment, you simply kept moving, adjusting course little by little, trusting that alignment would eventually happen, not because you forced it, but because you never stopped moving? It's worth thinking about that over these next 24 hours. Where are you moving? Even slowly, even without absolute certainty about the final destination. And where are you, actually, standing still, waiting for an external sign that might never come exactly the way you imagine? Because signs rarely arrive like a flashing light saying, "Here, this is it, go ahead." They arrive as small coincidences, as conversations that stir something inside you, as a sudden exhaustion with continuing the same way, as a sudden urge to try something different. And it's up to you to decide whether to pay attention to them or let them pass, like just another ordinary day. Maybe this week isn't an ordinary week. Maybe it's the kind of week that, looking back a year from now, you'll recognize as the moment when something truly started to change. Not because the moon did it for you, but because you chose to pay attention, chose to act, chose not to let one more moment of clarity slip by unnoticed. I want you to think about what it means to let go, too. Because that phrase comes up a lot when we talk about eclipses, but it's rarely explained in concrete terms. Letting go doesn't necessarily mean losing everything at once, dramatically. Sometimes it simply means no longer feeding something that no longer serves you. No longer responding the same automatic way to situations that always produce the same frustrating result. No longer justifying behaviors, yours or someone else's, that you know deep down aren't healthy for you. Letting go can be quiet. It can be a shift in posture more than a shift in scenery. You can stay in the same job, the same city, surrounded by the same people, and still be living a real end of a cycle, internal, invisible to anyone watching from the outside, but absolutely perceptible to the one living it from within. And that's why this week calls for less judgment about what your transformation should look like, and more honesty about how it's actually showing up in your life. Not every change needs to be visible to be real. Not every new beginning needs outside applause to be worth it. Let's talk now about new beginnings, because it's impossible to talk about endings without talking about what comes next. And here's an important reflection. New beginnings rarely arrive ready-made, packaged with clear instructions. They arrive as vague possibilities, as a sense of maybe this is the way, as a shy invitation that doesn't have a defined shape yet. And it's okay not to have total clarity about what comes next. What matters at this moment isn't knowing the exact final destination, but being willing to take the next step, even without seeing the whole staircase. This is, in fact, one of the most recurring ideas among those who study symbolic cycles and life transitions. You don't need to see the entire path to start walking. You just need to be able to see the next step. What's your next step? It can be small. It might even seem insignificant next to the magnitude you imagine a big transformation should have. But big transformations almost always start small. A message sent, an application submitted, a boundary set out loud for the first time, and no said to something you'd been accepting out of fear of disappointing someone. A yes given to something you'd been putting off out of fear of failing. Think about that as these final hours pass. What would be a small but real step you could take before tomorrow's eclipse? It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be pretty. It just needs to be true. And while you think about that, I want to bring back something we mentioned at the beginning, the idea that sometimes real progress doesn't require becoming a different person. We live in a culture obsessed with total reinvention, with improved versions of ourselves, as if who we are right now is never enough, as if we always need one more transformation, one more course, one more radical identity shift to finally deserve what we want. But is it always like that? Or sometimes is the real turning point not about becoming someone else, but about finally positioning yourself as who you already are in the right place at the right time? Think about people you admire who achieved something important. Often, what changed wasn't their essence, but the courage to put themselves in a position they used to avoid, whether asking for that opportunity, taking that risk, or simply showing up consistently until alignment happened. Maybe you don't need a complete reinvention. Maybe you just need to stop hiding behind excuses and position yourself exactly as you are, where opportunity can finally find you. And it's interesting to think that during an eclipse, no one needs to do anything for it to happen. It simply happens, following its own physics, its own timing. What's up to us, human beings watching from below, is deciding how we're going to use this moment. Are we going to let it pass like just another curious event on the calendar? Or are we going to use it as a symbolic turning point, conscious chosen, to review our priorities and reaffirm our commitments to ourselves? The choice, as always, is yours. Over these next 24 hours, it might be worth setting aside some time, even a small amount, to sit in silence. No phone, no distractions, just you and your own thoughts. Ask yourself what's really asking for attention in your life right now. Not what others expect from you, not what looks right from the outside. What genuinely deep in your chest is asking to be recognized, faced, decided. The answer might come immediately, clear, almost obvious, the moment you allow yourself to truly ask. Or it might come slowly, in fragments over the coming days. Don't force it, just make space. Sometimes making space is the only step needed for clarity to show up on its own. And when the moment of the eclipse arrives tomorrow, wherever you are, inside or outside the path of totality, with or without special glasses to view it directly, know that you can participate symbolically in this moment from anywhere. It's not about seeing the sky darken with your own eyes. It's about recognizing internally that this is a moment of pause, of transition, of possibility. You can close your eyes at the exact time, take a deep breath, and simply allow whatever needs to end, and whatever needs to begin, even if it's still invisible. Even if it doesn't yet have a defined shape, because the most beautiful thing about cycles, whether astronomical or symbolic, is that they're never truly the end of anything. They're just transitions. The sun doesn't stop existing when the moon passes in front of it. It stays there, whole, powerful, only temporarily obscured from our view. And just as the sun reappears, as strong as ever after a few minutes, whatever seems to be disappearing from your life right now might actually just be repositioning, reorganizing so it can reappear in a new form, perhaps more aligned with who you're becoming. It's worth remembering, once again, with total honesty, none of this is scientific guarantee that your life is going to change drastically just because an eclipse is happening. What actually provably changes is the attention you decide to give your own choices during this period. It's that attention, that renewed care with your decisions, that tends to generate different results, not some external cosmic force acting on its own, without your participation. So if you feel this week carries a different kind of weight, use that feeling to your advantage. Let it motivate you to finally have that conversation, to finally make that decision, to finally free yourself from what you know deep down no longer serves you. And let it also encourage you to take the first step towards something new, even without all the certainties, even without the path fully lit ahead of you. 24 hours left. And what you do with those hours is entirely in your hands. There's no single script everyone has to follow. There's only the invitation, quiet but persistent, to stop, look inward and ask, am I ready to let go of what no longer serves me? Am I willing to position myself exactly as I am, where change can finally happen? When the sun returns to shine fully tomorrow, after a few minutes of symbolic darkness, may it find in you a version of yourself a little more honest, a little braver, a little more willing to act instead of wait. Not because the universe demands it of you, but because you, deep down, always knew you deserved to take that step. You were just waiting for the right moment to finally allow yourself to. Maybe that moment is now. Maybe this week, so different from all the others, is exactly the space you needed to take a deep breath and finally decide, once and for all, to move forward. And if that's the case, may this journey, whether big or small, visible or quiet, begin with clarity, with courage, and with the calm certainty that you don't need all the answers right now. You just need to be willing to take the next step, trusting that, just as the sun always returns after the darkness, the light will come back for you too, maybe even brighter than before. Have a good eclipse week. May it find you ready, open and willing to position yourself exactly where you've always deserved to be.